Welcome back to BetterHelp's In Session series. My name is Hesu Jo, and I'm a licensed therapist and part of the clinical operations team here at BetterHelp. Today, I'm super excited to be joined by Micheline Maalouf, an Arab American therapist and a worldwide mental health educator, advocate, and speaker. Micheline is a licensed mental health counselor turned accidental mental health influencer and content creator. She started creating content to help increase access to mental health information and resources during the pandemic and quickly realized how important this work is. In her mental health practice, she specializes in the treatment of anxiety disorders such as generalized anxiety, OCD, and panic, as well as trauma disorders, more specifically, childhood and relational trauma disorders. Micheline loves learning and combining various empirically proven treatment modalities such as acceptance and commitment therapy, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, and emotionally focused therapy. She pays close attention to neurobiology and nervous system states to help individuals understand what's happening within their bodies and help them regulate and heal. Micheline, thank you so much for being on our In Session series today. To start us off, can you tell us a little bit more about your journey in becoming a therapist and then now an accidental mental health influencer and content creator?
Sure. Thank you so much. My journey becoming a therapist is basically I struggled with my own mental health growing up. I was always interested in psychology, always drawn to the psychology classes, to the books. And so I didn't really know what that was about. Come to find out later on, it's like a way that most of us therapists like to identify as, hey, trying to fix ourselves. So that was one of the reasons. I gave up trying to go to graduate school after I got my bachelor's because I didn't think I was good enough or smart enough to get into a graduate program. So I never actually applied right after college. Took some time to just try to figure out what I could do. It was right around 2008 when the recession hit. And so it was a big struggle. Ended up struggling with depression after a relationship, which landed me in therapy. And that therapist helped me so much that I was able to say, wow, like this is such impactful work. And it felt so nice having the support. And it kind of encouraged me to go back and find a way to get into graduate school, work through my insecurities about that. And here I am. And so I started my private practice after I graduated. I was working at a college for a little while, actually helping students get their degree in psychology. And then I started my private practice and the pandemic hit, like right at the time where I decided that I was going to go full time in my private practice. I started, like many others, on TikTok, posting mental health education and resources because I knew how much everyone was really struggling with this. And that blew up overnight. And that's why I say I'm an accidental influencer, because that was never an intention. But now here I am, and I actually really love it. I love teaching people about mental health, providing access, talking about concepts that seem so complicated and kind of simplifying them so people can feel less alone and provide tools for free of charge because a lot of people don't have access to mental health care.
Thank you. I mean, this is no knock to folks that put forth the intention to becoming these content creators and finding success. But I think it says a lot to folks, especially like you, that wasn't your intention. You just wanted to share something. And for it to blow up overnight, as you say, I think that really speaks to people are craving this content. People really want to hear and learn more about this. And for somebody to set forth and just wanting to share the info rather than I'm going to be an influencer, I think that many of your listeners will have already felt and noticed that difference. So I really appreciate you taking to these various spaces to bring that knowledge. I'm eager to get into this topic of conversation because you're with us today to talk about something that not a lot of people talk about. I think I started seeing more about it in social media spaces fairly recently. And now, in pockets of spaces like this, it's a hot topic. You're hearing buzzwords like dissociative identity disorder a lot more now than maybe 10 years ago. So that topic, of course, is dissociation. I think a lot of people have an idea of what this is. And I think you and I know a lot of people also don't truly understand what's going on when somebody says this. So first, can you help define this? What is dissociation and what are some examples of it?
Sure. Yeah. Dissociation, simply put, is a disconnection from your environment and from yourself, or both. It's a protective mechanism that your body and your mind learn to adapt to a traumatic experience or event. In the more severe cases of dissociation, it is something that is a trauma response to get our body to feel less pain. And we can go into that a little bit later. But there are generally normal forms of dissociation where we're not present currently, like checking out, zoning out, daydreaming. Those are just things that we do every single day, possibly, that can be classified as kind of dissociated or not really here in the moment. And then you have more severe forms of dissociation. So I always say dissociation happens on the spectrum, where on this side of the spectrum, you have, like I said, checking out, zoning out, daydreaming. And then towards the middle of the spectrum, you have something called derealization and depersonalization. Those two forms, the derealization is pretty much a disconnection from your surroundings. So this is where somebody might feel like they're real, but everything around them isn't. So a lot of people describe that feeling as feeling like they're in virtual reality, or they're looking at the world through a funhouse mirror or a video game. Everything just seems off, like maybe too big or too small and distorted, sort of. That's derealization. And then you have depersonalization, which is where your disconnection is actually from your own body. So you might not recognize who you are in the mirror, or maybe you look at yourself and you're like, who is this person? Maybe your hands feel a little bit off. Maybe you look at your body and it feels a little bit distorted. You have a disconnection from your own emotions and your physical sensations. So you might not feel pain or be completely numb emotionally or physically. And then as we go up the spectrum, you have more severe forms of dissociation. One of them being what you mentioned earlier, which was dissociative identity disorder, which was previously known as multiple personality disorder. And this is usually developed out of severe, intense, chronic trauma in childhood, where a person experienced so much pain and so much trauma that they had to almost fragment and create these alters in order to survive and keep moving forward. It's a survival mechanism, essentially.
It sounds like this whole spectrum, like you said, I mean, you mentioned this. A lot of the times this is happening as a, I guess, like result, is that the right word? Something that happens after trauma. Something inside of us is trying to protect us from something else. So while you're describing derealization, depersonalization, and any kind of dissociation, I can see somebody being very frightened if they start to experience this and have no idea what's going on. So I appreciate your education here. I hope that anybody listening to this, if some of this rings true to you, now you have some language so you know what to search for and do some research about maybe what's going on and maybe options to start feeling better. Like I thought of sometimes when you're on a long commute and you kind of snap back into reality and you're like, I don't even remember driving the past 10 miles. Folks, this is dissociation. Sometimes it happens because you're in the car and you're just zoning out. But sometimes it does happen when there's like real perceived danger or threat. You mentioned sometimes people will fragment parts of themselves. And in this work, we know of people and their alters, like you mentioned, as a system. So what's going on in this fragmented thing? And can you say a little bit more about like alters? Some people may have never heard that word before.
So one of the best ways I've heard this described, just like why dissociation happens, to start there, is you have your fight, flight, and freeze responses, right? So when a threat happens initially, whether it's a perceived or an actual threat, so our nervous system, something is triggering us, we have an initial like freeze, deer caught in headlight state that happens. And that happens for a matter of like a few seconds, like milliseconds even. And then your nervous system decides whether or not it can fight the threat and kill the threat, and therefore you survive. Or if it can't, then it decides, can I run away and flee this threat? And therefore you survive. And if it decides that neither of those two options are actually an option for you, it will go into the secondary freeze response, which is what we call flop, drop, freeze. And this is where that fragmentation happens, where your body's heart rate's reducing, your breathing is reducing, you're disconnected from your body and your surroundings so that you don't feel so much pain as the threat tries to kill you, essentially, or so that you can play dead and, back in caveman days, possibly escape the threat in that way. So what's happening is one of the best ways I've heard it described is think of dissociation as your body's autonomic circuit breaker, just like your house. If you plug too many things in at once and it gets overwhelmed, it shuts off the circuits in your home to protect it from fire. Our body has that same response. So if you're overwhelmed, even if there's not like an actual danger coming at you like a bear these days, if you're overwhelmed by too many things, if there's something chronically happening in your life that's overwhelming your system, your body has this state to protect you, because what your body's trying to do is keep you alive, not keep you happy and not keep you living your best life. Ideally, it just wants you to stay alive. So it turns on this dissociative state to keep you protected. And one of those ways, when you're a child, let's say, and you're dealing with severe trauma, sometimes like in cases of like sexual trauma or chronic abuse, physical, emotional, mental, remembering the trauma and replaying that trauma consistently in your mind would lead to possible death. It's too overwhelming for us. So what ends up happening is a lot of children and young adults will dissociate. You will forget what happened. In many instances, develop parts of you to protect you. So this is where alters, we all have parts. So this isn't like a foreign concept of, like all of us have mentioned the word, like a part of me wants to do this and a part of me does not want to do this. So these parts exist within all of us where we have, multiple aspects of who we are. But in the cases of dissociative identity disorder, these parts are heightened and created to take over in that moment so that the person can survive and live without having to live that recurring trauma. So it depends on what age. Many people can have different types of alters, different genders, different ages. It doesn't even have to be a person. It could be a character. So there's a lot to that, and it's all serving a purpose, and they can all be triggered by different people in different situations. But again, that's one of the most severe cases. Those are more in the severe cases of DID. Like you said, it's a system working to keep that person alive. So this all serves a purpose so that our system isn't overwhelmed all the time.
Wow. That is a lot. And while you were describing kind of what's happening after trauma, this system that sometimes gets created to try to protect us, all of this, some pieces of it sound very primitive, right? It's like, it makes sense when you think about it. And folks, I want everyone to understand this is actually very rare. Even though we're talking a lot about it, I don't want people to think that this is like a very common thing that happens all the time. And because that part is like the most severe part, but I know that people are very interested in it, is why I think it's like still beneficial to talk about it. What are the goals of therapy for somebody entering therapy, living with these alters? What happens there?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I know you're mentioning that it's rare, but like I said, it doesn't have to be full-blown DID for you to identify with these things. Like, let's say I'm going to give an example that everyone can probably relate to. You might have situations where you're in an abusive relationship or not in a healthy relationship, and maybe you feel really disconnected and dissociated and numb in that person's presence, but a part of you does not want to leave, doesn't feel safe enough to leave, or doesn't have the opportunity or resources to leave, and a part of you does and wants to get out. And so that might happen. You might find yourself one day feeling like really wanting to stay in the relationship and the next not. So even though the full form of dissociation, DID, is really rare, the derealization, depersonalization, and just that fragmentation of parts of ourselves might be very common. So in therapy, whether it is DID or not, we are trying to get all of those parts of you to work together as a system to help you come to the best solutions or coping skills for yourself. So in cases of derealization, dissociation, if you're chronically in those states of dissociation, we want to first find out, okay, what is happening currently in your life that is leading to that? Because a lot of people will come and say, I really am tired of feeling dissociated. I'm feeling like this all the time. I don't know what to do about it. I don't feel real. It's scaring me. And the question is always like, are you in a situation where this response is needed? If you're currently in a traumatic environment, then it makes sense that you're always dissociating. So we don't want to say that this is something that is wrong with you. We're actually wanting to switch that script and say, this is actually something that's really right with you, because you need that. Because imagine you didn't have that. How would you go to work? How would you function throughout the day? You might not be able to get anything done. So this dissociative state is actually helping you. Now, if you're outside of the traumatic environment and you've just kind of gotten stuck in that state, then we start working on regulating, re-regulating your nervous system and helping your mind and body recognize that you're no longer in danger. That is done through many different forms, depending on the type of therapist you have and the modality. One really, really popular way to do that is mind-body connection through like acceptance and commitment types of therapy, or maybe internal family systems type of therapy, where they work on, those parts and kind of validating and including every single part of you and creating safety both in your environment and your body. So there's no one right way that we deal with this, but almost every single therapy modality will have some sort of education about what's happening in your body, some sort of grounding tools and connection between mind and body, and then approaching it from a place of growth. And how can we recognize that this is actually a healthy coping skill that's not needed today, but we do want access to in case we need it. So we don't want to eliminate it. We just want to not be in it all the time.
Thank you for making that really important distinction between what I said of rarity and actually how a lot of these symptoms, or is symptom the right word? The things that happen when we dissociate, why that happens, those kinds of things, like you said, very common. And you already really talked about this link existing between trauma, dissociation. Can you say a bit about a lot of people experience trauma, unfortunately. I wouldn't say that same amount of people ends up experiencing some kind of level of dissociation. So I don't know if you know of risk factors or things that might contribute to someone's likelihood of developing something like this.
I mean, individual differences are so important because two people can go through the same exact trauma and one person can end up with trauma symptoms and, something that we call mental health disorder versus another person may not. And I always talk about the importance of understanding the individual differences, the internal and external resources that a person has access to. So these could be things that we call resilience factors. So there's things that help offset the trauma. So let's say two siblings are in the same household and they both go through the same exact traumatic experience with their parents, but one person develops this dissociative symptom or dissociative disorder, and then the other does not. Why is that? So what we want to take a look at in those cases is, well, one, even when you were parented by the same parents, there's always a slight difference in the way the parents parented you versus your sibling because you're different people. Secondly, a sibling that doesn't have dissociation may have gone to school and had support. Maybe their teachers were really supportive and attuned to what was going on. Maybe they had more supportive friends. Maybe they had an outlet, a friend's parents or somebody that really cared. Maybe they were more open to seeking services at school. So there's little things. Maybe they were involved in extracurricular activities that helped release some of the stuff that was happening at home. Whereas the other sibling maybe didn't have that much luck with their teachers and their friends, or even one of those things was missing. So that one little thing that was missing that the other person had may contribute to somebody developing something where another person may not. So we all have the capacity to develop certain strategies from our nervous system to self-preserve. Whether or not they manifest, again, has to do with what's happening at home and what support systems you might have outside the home. And then one other part is internal resources that we might have. So how do you view life? What's your worldview? And this is not something that we want to say, well, somebody has a quote unquote better mindset than you or anything, because that can also be just individual differences based on personality and just what we have access to internally. So it's just a lot that goes into that. So it's a very complicated answer, but it's just important to kind of what are some of the things that lead to it or offset it? Those would be it.
Thank you for that. For people that may really resonate with things that you have been saying, and they're like, oh, I think I've experienced that. I think it's now kind of getting in the way now that I'm realizing that this is what's going on with me. If this person is now wondering, where do I even start? How do I look for the right kind of therapist? Because I want to talk to someone about it. What would you recommend?
Yeah, that's an amazing question. I think a therapist-client relationship is very unique, just like any other relationship. So my first piece of advice is interview the therapist that you're going to work with. Find somebody that does say they specialize in trauma, because if they specialize in trauma, they're more likely than not going to know about dissociation and going to know how to implement trauma-informed care to help you with your traumatic symptoms or whatever's happening with your body. But also, research continues to show us over and over again that the relationship that you have with your therapist is the number one indicator for successful treatment. So the therapist could be the most trained therapist in the world, but if you don't feel connected to that person, then you're likely not going to feel safe enough to express what's going on and implement the strategies, because a lot of therapy is really having that safe relationship and modeling that safety with external relationships as well. So I would say interview the therapist, see if the therapist is somebody that you can connect with. They understand, you feel understood, you feel validated. If they don't know something, they're not getting defensive about not knowing something, but they're willing to be honest about it and say, you know what, let me take a look into that. Let me research that further. Somebody that is able to take negative feedback from you as a client, that is really, really important, because therapists are human and they're going to mess up. They're going to say something you don't like. They're going to be late to a session. Something's going to happen. And so I think if you're able to express what they did or what they said, and they are safe and they're responding in a constructive way, then you're going to feel safer. And remember, anything with dissociation, it's this perceived or actual threats that are happening in your system, mostly probably induced through relational traumas. Most of the time, that's what's happening. So a really healthy therapeutic alliance is more healing than a lot of people realize. So I would say definitely give your therapist a few sessions, talk to them. And if after like 4 sessions, you're still like, I can't be me, I don't feel safe with this person, then find another one, ask for another one. If you're going, to BetterHelp or another agency, ask for another therapist. It's something that is really important to take a look at that. But my favorite modalities that has been super helpful for people with dissociative identity disorder and any dissociative disorder is what I mentioned earlier, which is internal family systems therapy, otherwise known as IFS. That is an amazing treatment modality because it literally is parts work. It's whether you have DID or not, I as a therapist go to my own IFS therapist and we work through those parts, like the part of me that doesn't want to go to work today, the part of me that does, the part of me that's stressed, the part of me that's happy, and just working through all of those parts to help you come from a place that they call self, that higher self, that self that's able to make a decision that's based on your best interest and not necessarily as a trauma response.
It's great. And I got to give a shout out to IFS also. For folks who aren't familiar, you can look this stuff up, internal family systems. Initially, you might think it's about family therapy, but it's really about identifying, like you said, these different parts of us. They actually will help you identify the different roles that you have taken on individually. I'm not super knowledgeable on the details of IFS, but I know you're identifying things like a savior role even, or like an escaping type of role, like these different roles inside of us. So you can really dissect and have ultimately conversations with the pieces of yourself that you haven't been doing or neglecting in some way.
Exactly. I'm definitely not trained in IFS. I just receive IFS as a client. And I use parts of it with my own clients. I don't know the exact terms, but yes, they do have like names for different types of parts. I know there are exiles, there are managers and firefighters and all of these parts of you. And these are the titles, but you might have so many parts underneath those titles acting in those ways for you. But yeah, it's all protection, it's fascinating.
Yes. What I'm walking away with is there's so many things that our body is doing, trying to protect us, keep us safe. But sometimes it's not always like the most logical way, right? It's like going to be the fastest, scrappiest, sometimes dirtiest way to prevent something. And sometimes that works. A lot of times the protection piece is actually a barrier between us and like living a fulfilling, healthy life. To your piece of like advice on how somebody can start looking for a therapist, I'm also hearing a really, really key piece of advice that a lot of people aren't always considering when they begin this journey of looking for a therapist is it's going to take time. It may take quite a lot of tries to find this person that you feel really safe with. So my encouragement to folks is not to give up. It can be very frustrating. It can take a lot of time and energy to have to interview more than one therapist to find that person for you. But when you think about like you've been living with these challenges and sometimes problems for years and years and years and years. So for you to think that you're going to find the therapist to solve those problems right away, that's not really fair to yourself either. So listen to Micheline, folks, and give therapists a chance, but also believe in your own gut. If this isn't the one for you, please continue looking for the right match. So now we heard a lot about what these things are, like what kind of therapist somebody can look for. But in the meantime, before somebody finds a therapist, do you have any tips? Like what are some things that people can do to just like deal with this challenge of zoning out sometimes?
Absolutely. I think this is one of my favorite things to talk about usually on my channels. Like I mentioned at the beginning here, when you're in that dissociative state, you're in that flop drop. So your body is disengaged, disconnected. So the more that you can activate that body, although it's extremely difficult, this is going to be so counterintuitive because the last thing you want to do when you're dissociated, because you usually feel heavy and tired and withdrawn, is to get up and move. But micro movements might start it. So anything micro movement, like even like shifting your gaze to different parts of the room and trying to orient your body to where you are. Then micro movements with your fingers and hands. If you are not totally dissociated, but you're kind of, in the middle of it and you do have access to bigger body movements, then shaking is actually a really good way to get that blood flow moving and send a signal to your mind that you're actually not under threat. So put on your favorite song. You don't have to be a good dancer, but literally just shake your body, like just shake, shake, shake. Tapping from practices. Sometimes I'll put on a YouTube video and there's this one where they tap up and down the arms or tapping your chest or kind of like flopping your hands around your body and doing it for a while and then stopping and noticing the vibrations that are happening in your body. That's going to reorient again your mind to your body. If you're disconnected from your own body. So even looking at your hands and kind of noticing them, moving them, seeing if you can gently massage and feel something is really helpful. If you are disoriented from your surroundings, if you're going through derealization, grabbing weights and holding weights in your hand, because that helps orient your brain back to where you are. Pushing against a wall really hard, almost like you're going to push it over. And again, orienting yourself to the environment. So things that are body focused to connect your mind and body, or environment focused to connect your body to your environment, are going to be helpful. You can do parts with yourself as well. Like you don't have to have a therapist to try to identify what's happening with yourself. So if you're feeling like you're about to dissociate, you're about to fall into that state, you can check in with yourself and say, okay, what am I feeling? Is there a part of me that's scared right now or that's perceiving any threat? And you might be surprised that you'll find that maybe a part of you heard someone's voice that triggered you because it reminded you of somebody from the past, and just checking in with that part, maybe tending to it like you would a friend. And then seeing if there's another part of you that also exists there that maybe wants to do something and is angry at you because you're so dissociated. And so really checking in with that part too and being like, okay, well, I know that you're frustrated because you want to do this, but you can't. And it's okay, like self-compassion, offering those parts of you, the compassion that you would offer a loved one or a friend. So that's more of the cognitive part of it if you can get there. But prior to that cognitive part, it's really important that you get that body moving and increasing blood flow.
Thank you. I'm sure that some of these tips are going to help folks, because some of that stuff I can understand that people don't realize that there are these little things that they can do in a variety of different moments. And then the overarching thing that I'm also hearing is the wonderful benefits of practicing mindfulness on a very regular basis. And we're not here today to talk about mindfulness at length, but this is a great practice to incorporate into your life all the time, which allows somebody to be better able to access the attention shifting, the ability to bring their attention to right here and right now. And a lot of what you're talking about is very much getting us into the right here and the right now, because I think dissociation, depression, anxiety, a lot of these states are when our mind is not in the right here and the right now. It's somewhere else and it's having a hard time. So thank you so much for all those tips. And for anybody else that's more interested in looking further into this, now you have a lot of that language, and also look into mindfulness. So really appreciate your time again, Micheline. Where can folks learn more about you? Because I definitely want to keep looking into some of the things that you're putting out there too.
Sure. Thank you. I'm on TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube. My handle is at Micheline.Maalouf on TikTok and Instagram. I also believe it's the same on YouTube, or the dot might or might not be there. But if you search my name on YouTube, you'll find me there. I also have a podcast called Mindfully Healing. So that's usually where you'll find me, mostly on Instagram stories and things like that. But I always love talking about dissociation and anxiety. So you'll definitely get more of that content. on those channels.
Thank you. Great. Well, thank you so much for your time, your energy, your expertise. And I hope this was helpful to other people as much as it was helpful to me. So, again, really appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.